All right, how's everybody doing? People can hear me, I hope. We'll just give it a couple of minutes. We're just waiting for a few more people. And yeah, the only thing today is I've got a hard stop at 5 to 1. But we will, my presentation is going to be relatively short, and then we'll get to questions and we can use up the rest of the time in other ways. So welcome everybody. We're in, I don't know what week we're in doing this, but hopefully you guys appreciate you coming back. So today we're going to do some just time-saving tips, some things that I use and ways that we're going to build in some time-saving things. So I'm just going to share my screen, and I hope you guys can see. So the couple things. The first thing was that I just want to, this is a word issue. What I want to show you is a way of making sure that the fields are automatically updated whenever you print it. So if you go to save it as a, as a PDF or print it as a PDF or print it out as a hard copy, you want all the field codes to update. So if you go to File and Options, you'll see the word options, and you go to Display, and below Display there's printing options, and it'll say update fields before printing. So that way you're assured that the version that you print has everything updated, everything linked, etc. So that's what you'd want to do there as far as making sure that the page numbering is updated, the fonts are updated, all of those things, the links are updated. So that's under, again, I'll just show you where it is. It's File, Options, and then Display and Update Fields before printing. So that's the first time-saving trick. Because I often get to the point where, I'm at the end of the document and I see, oh, it says page, 0 pages or 1 page here. So when I go to print, let's see if this actually works. But when I go to print, it would update that to the right number of pages. That's the idea. And right now, actually, you're looking at the new version of the documents. So with the fonts that you can amend and all of those kinds of things. So, but that's the first tip. The second tip is dealing with, I'm just going to remove that, dealing with cloning and copying. Let me just go and get rid of, make sure that my assets, okay. So let's say that I want to create a gift to somebody. We'll pick a charity as an example, but I want it made regardless of who's alive in both scenarios. For example, both if the spouse is alive or, and if my issue are alive. So in either case, I don't want it restricted. So the way to do that is we create a cash legacy. Let's just pick, I always pick the World Fund. Let's just do that as an example. This would work for any beneficiary. It doesn't have to be a charity, of course. And we want to give $100,000 to them. Now, we want that $100,000 if the spouse is alive, okay? But we also want $100,000 if the spouse is not alive. So we can do two things. One, you could go to the next scenario and add the same exact, let's get rid of that, sorry. That's left over from someplace else. So you could add them in because we created it in the surviving spouse. We could go to the no descendants or descendants only and add it in as well. The problem is, of course, that you could end up making a mistake and creating a slightly different legacy in that situation. But if you want the exact same legacy, the easy way to do it and to save yourself time is when you create this legacy, which we've done. Once we've created, we hit the three dot button and we go to copy to, okay? Then it will give us the option to copy it to another scenario, the other two scenarios that aren't the one we're in. So we want it to be paid basically regardless of whether the spouse is alive, if the spouse is alive or if the spouse is not alive. So we're going to copy it to descendants only. And we're also going to copy it to the no descendants. Let me just make sure to the, to the no descendants. So we just copied it to the descendants only. Then we have to go back and now copy it to the no descendants. Now, when we flip between them, so here we are in the surviving spouse, you'll see the $100,000 gift. Then we go to descendants only, you'll see the same $100,000 gift. And then we'll go to the no descendants and you'll see the same $100,000 gift. So we've just replicated, in other words, cloned or copied to, not is better, the better way, copied it to all three scenarios. So A, it's a time-saving matter. Two, it's consistency. You don't have to worry about making a mistake. And the third thing is that when you generate the document, and I'll just try to just show you what the document would say. The opening of the gift will be different. So for example, let me just go up here. So this is the initial gift right here that we just did, right? And I'll just try to blow it up just so you can see it a bit better. So here's the $100,000 gift. Now, what that cloning did is the program saw that the gift is made regardless of whether the spouse is alive or not. So what it did is it removed the line that said, you know, if my spouse is alive at the survival date here, and it also removed the point where, oh, I need someone else alive. So it removed the opening condition. So now it just says, look, pay this $100,000. There's no condition. It's not whether. Don't worry about if the spouse is alive or the spouse is not alive. Pay this, and that's the advantage to doing that cloning, is that it'll change the opening. Because of course, if we had just put this gift in the first scenario, it would say, if my spouse is alive, pay $100,000. If we had put it only in the second scenario, it would have said, if my spouse is not alive, but I leave issue alive, pay this amount, right? But by copying it to all, it eliminates, it has the right wording as the condition of the gift. I'm just going to stop there for a second and see if anybody has any questions about that. And we'll just make sure that you guys are unmuted and can participate. Any questions about that copy to function? Yeah, so it's important. One thing I would just double check is that you check the conditions of the gift so that it doesn't, you know, say something that you don't want. Now it's only going to say something. It's got the logic built in, but sometimes you put it in the surviving spouse scenario, but you don't put the gift in the other scenarios, even though you want it in the other scenarios. So that's just, you know, kind of a warning there. To just double check that this opening clause is appropriate to the scenario that you're talking about.
So Jordan, if you put it into the descendants and no descendants clause, what would it show up as then?
It would say, if my spouse is not alive.
Okay,
at the survival.
It will default to that then.
Yeah, it depends actually, but it may either say, if my spouse is not alive and I leave issue, give 100,000. And then in the no descendants, in the no descendants section, it would say, you know, pay 100. If after giving effect to all of this, no one's alive, give it to make that same distribution of $100,000. So I'm actually working on whether we want to just have it removed it completely, which I think is what happens in this scenario. But it works. You don't have to worry. It works properly.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Other questions about copying? And that works for, you know, if you want the same resident, like sometimes you'll have a situation where, look, you've got a surviving spouse, it's a second marriage, and the client is giving nothing to the surviving spouse. They're giving it all to the kids and not to the surviving spouse. And you actually want that regardless. You want it in both this scenario. So let me just show you how that would work. Let's just get rid of this. So second marriage, you say, okay, I want it going to my children regardless of if my spouse is alive. So what I would do there is I'd click the copy to, descendants only, it would warn me. Okay, so I've already made a gift into descendants only. It's warning me it's going to clear the existing one. So yes, that's fine. And now when I generate the will, it won't say, if my spouse is alive or not alive, pay it. It'll just say, pay it to my kids. And so that's an example of an important, way of planning. You don't have to repeat the same thing again, especially in a second marriage where the residue is going to be the same in both scenarios. So that's that. Let me just show you the use, and jump in if you've got questions, but let me just show you the use of cloning gifts. So I'm just going to remove this completely. And here we have a situation where the client wants each child, we're dividing it up into a bunch of segments because we're not treating the children necessarily exactly the same for whatever reason, or people. It doesn't have to be children, it could be anybody, but they're basically the same. So we're going to add a segment as an example. Let's add a segment for 25%, let's just say. Okay, so we're going to actually have 4 gifts here, and we're going to add a gift. And let's say the gift is it's going to be a gift in a trust to age 31. And we got payment of income starting at age 26. Let's just say that, and it suspends if they're insolvent, etc. Okay, so we've got a sort of pretty complicated one that we're doing here, and then we're going to limit the discretion on some to a total aggregate limit of $500,000. I don't know, complicated, with a gift over to the beneficiaries issue. All right, so it's a fairly complicated. It took us some time to do that. We actually want pretty much the same one done for the next 4 segments. Well, we could create each segment separately, or we could just clone that. And so we would just click on that, clone, and now you have the second, which is exactly the same as the first one. You just have to go in and change the beneficiary from Cleo to Joe. Okay, and that's how you can replicate the same gifts each time. And then we can clone that one again, and now we have the 4 gifts, and there you go. And they all have similar terms. And if you wanted them all pretty close, but one of them's a little bit different and you didn't want to repeat it, you could do it that way. The one thing I would do, there's 2 things I would do whenever I clone. And this we're fixing, but for now it's manual. So the segment name, you probably want to just change that segment name from segment 1 copy to segment 2 for that one. And then segment 3 for this one, or whatever however you like to deal with it. But that's what I would do, because this copy 2 doesn't make any sense. So I'd want to just edit the name there, so that it says segment 1, segment 2, segment 3. We're going to do it so that it automatically renumbers them, but for now it's manual. And the other thing that, of course, you're going to want to change is probably the beneficiary, right? So it's going to, remember, whenever you do this clone, it copies all the information. So you might want to change Cleo in this one to Dave Smith. And now we're creating the same gift in 4 different places. And that's an easy way, because sometimes you don't want to divide everything. It's not going to be exactly the same in all of them. But they're going to be pretty close, and you don't have to want to start from scratch for each one. That's another time saving. Any questions about that? No? All right. In the meantime, you guys are getting the first glimpse of the new version that's coming out we're hoping to release it on our anniversary, our first anniversary, which is July 1st, but it's going to generate the wills and the affidavits of execution. You'll be able to put in the witnesses for the wills, and will automatically generate the affidavit if you want it, the affidavit of execution. You can have it generate for both witnesses or just one of the witnesses. You'll be able to bold and capitalize the names in the will. So whenever it refers to an individual, it'll have their name bolded and capitalized or just bolded or not, and be able to change the justification, the margins, the font size, the font, and those kinds of things. You'll also be able to decide whether you want to include a will guide when you generate it, whether you want to include a joint asset confirmation. So that's at the beginning that says, if I've got anything joint, I really mean it. And then whether you want an RSP clause to be generated, regardless of whether you did the planning, showed them in the portal or not. So that's what we've got coming down the pike. Just a glimpse of that, and yeah, and then we have more changes coming as we release as we go. So, any other questions or comments? Any suggestions? Lots of suggestions, I'm sure, but maybe hold those or email them to me. Yeah, so that's where we're at. Anybody have an issue that they're working on, or a way of doing something, or? It's a quiet group.
Jordan, could you re-explain the templates thing? So if I've created a template of wording that I want to use, how I go ahead and integrate that so that it populates, or how that works?
Yeah, so your old versions are still going to be available, so you can still use the old ones if you've modified them. If you've modified wording, right now you're probably going to use the old version for now, but why don't we talk offline about the changes you've made, and we can figure out a way to expose those as options, perhaps. We're figuring out a way, basically, just the plan is down the road, and in the shorter rather than the long term, is that you're going to actually be able to manipulate the whole thing and add clauses and all of those, and see what clauses choose this clause versus that clause in this situation, that kind. So we're working on that. But if there's significant drafting changes, I want to, maybe we'll schedule a time to talk offline.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, guys? Anybody run into any issues that we haven't been able to solve? Just a couple of things we're working on. So obviously this a huge, and the template is actually going to just be better for not repeating provisions that we don't need, et cetera. But the other thing that we have is this idea of being able to craft your own. But the one I'm working on right now is the pooled trust, and making that a better, more options available to create pooled trusts where you've got, anyway, that's what we're working on as well. So we're working full steam ahead on a lot of the changes that we had in our pipeline. Other questions? No? How is everyone doing? Jump in and say hi. Hope everyone's doing okay and working through things. I've got a question here, a chat. Can you remind me how to clone for a mirror will? Sure. So right now it's per scenario. So if I'm in James, I want Samantha to have the same provision. Once I've finished it, I just click on the clone button and it'll override. So if I now go to Samantha, it will be the same provision for her. Now, if for example, if it was James's siblings, if it said James's siblings, now it'll say my spouse's siblings. So it reverses those kinds of things. But if it's people, it'll just put the same people in. That's how you clone. So it's per scenario. So if I wanted to clone, and remember, you want to clone from the right person to the right person. That is, from the one you're working on to the person that you haven't been working on. Otherwise, it'll erase everything. But if you go to the descendants only, we want to clone that, just click the clone button, it'll do that. The appointments, same thing. The clone button though is at the bottom here. So if I want to clone all of the appointees, once I've made that, I just click there and it'll reverse that. So where Samantha Smith's name was, it's now James Smith. Okay, that's how that works. I'm working on the provisions tab to be able to just sync that, because in most cases that is the same for both. So we'll want to do that. And I think I'd like your feedback, but does it make sense to add a global sync button so that you don't have to sync per scenario? I think it does make sense, because in many cases the syncing is exactly this. You know, you want to just sync everything at once, and maybe that's we'll build that option in as well, just so you don't. I was always worried that one scenario might be slightly different for the spouse, and if we did a global, but we'll give that as an option.
Jordan,
Yep.
Teresa here. I'm just wondering, for personal care, is there an opportunity to have a compensation clause in there as well?
It's in there automatically.
Is there?
So, yeah.
Oh,
So
okay.
if I click, I'll just generate that just to show you. So we're again, that's on our list, obviously, to build this into the portal so that you'll be able to click off it or whatever you want. But right now it's automatically built in, and if you don't want it, you just delete it. So let me just show you that. And same with the end of life clause and that kind of stuff. But here's the compensation clause.
Okay.
Okay. So if you don't want it or you want to amend it, you can do that.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Yes to the global. Okay. Global sync. Yep. Exactly. I agree. Warnings, warnings, warnings. So guys, I've got to, unless I'm happy to answer a couple of other questions, but I've got to leave in about 2 minutes. And of course, we're always here for questions on our support page, or just email us with any issues or questions or how to do something. I know most of you do that, which is great. Yeah, we're looking forward to this update. We've been working hard on it, and it's going to be great. So.
Thanks, Jordy.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank
Okay.
you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.